So we're continuing our series, The Wonderful Name that is God. Now, the one that I have been tasked with this morning is the everlasting God. And it's funny because I actually had one verse in mind, but you know how it is. Once God starts to speak, he changes the verse. And me and Pastor just happen to have the same verse. And I'm like, that's a God thing. It's pretty good. So we're actually going to read that verse this morning. It is Isaiah chapter 40, verse 28. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. No one can fathom this everlasting God, even the idea of everlasting, forever. Now, I know sometimes we think we understand forever. I can at least admit for myself, I cannot. I know I've been in positions where I've waited at the DMV and it took forever. I've been stuck in traffic and it took forever. I've watched children and it took forever. Forever. And it's funny because sometimes you can actually look back at those moments that were forever and realize that they were just a blink of an eye. You're maybe in a circumstance, in a situation that feels like forever, but as you look back, you're like, man, that was over before I knew it. It's a little hard to understand forever because we're just mortal creatures bound by time. We actually see this in Psalms 90, verse 1 through 4. And it says, Lord, you have been our dwelling place through all generations. Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. You turn people back to dust, saying, return to dust, you mortals. 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. 1,000 years. Sometimes I actually forget how long that actually is. Like, I remember a time when I couldn't be without my cell phone, but when I really think back, I'm like 10, 15, 20 years ago, those were not the days back then. I remember my sister, she had what was called a pager. They went beep, 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 beep. And then, oh, look, it can see 3 numbers and 3 letters. That's a miracle. That was like 20 years ago. And half the young people here are like, what's a pager? It's okay, I don't know. Or like the old times when the car phone or the personal phone wasn't your just little mobile device, but this giant backpack that you carried around. It's crazy. It's crazy to think about that not that long ago, flying was just a fantasy. Who would think that we would soar on wings like eagles? We'd be in these giant jets. That was only read about in the Bible. We didn't actually expect that. And that was just within the last 100 years. 1,000 years are but like a day. Everlasting to everlasting, olam to olam. It also can kind of be translated to vanishing point to vanishing point. That's far beyond my sight. That's far beyond what I can understand. That kind of power, that kind of being, that kind of everlasting power, that's a lot. You know, I watch too much TV. I do. I admit it a little bit, not too much, but I do know that my roommates sometimes say, he's like, you watch way too much TV. And then I say, you're a liar. It's the same thing. But I bring it up because I was actually watching this movie, and I really love the movie. I can't think of the name to save my life. But in this movie, it's a little heartbreaking, but at the same time, it's heartwarming. There's this child. He's about 7 years old. In his entire life, he was raised in one room. In a room. He had never seen the outside world. He had never seen a tree in person. He had never really seen the sky. He had a television, but he thought everything that was on the TV was make-believe. When he saw pictures of people or things, he's like, those are just fantasies. Those are drawings. They don't really exist. And it's funny because his mother, who knew the outside world, is trying to explain that those things really exist. And for him, he couldn't understand it. He couldn't fathom that there could be more beyond this point. I bring that up because I almost find myself in that same situation when I try to think of a God that is everlasting to everlasting. From vanishing point beyond my sight to vanishing point beyond my sight. I can't understand that. That power is beyond me. Like the verse says, I'm just going to return to dust. I'm mortal. I was made from the dust. I have a beginning. I do not understand being everlasting. But what I do understand is that that is a kind of power that I can call upon. That is the kind of power that I should be able to rely on. In fact, we see this in Genesis chapter 21, verse 33. It says, Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there he called on the name of the Lord, the eternal God. I know it says eternal God, but this is actually the same word, El Olam, everlasting God. Why did Abraham call upon the name of the Lord, the everlasting God? Because everlasting is what Abraham began to rely on. He knew that that was a power that could be trusted. You see, it is actually the same word, olam, everlasting, is actually also given to Abraham in his promise. When God promised that his descendants would be forever, that his descendants would last forever, he's using the word olam, forever, everlasting. So Abraham understands that this everlasting God with everlasting power will forever be there, and that is a strength and a power that I can rely on. A power that I could count on. An everlasting power that has given me an everlasting promise to hold on to. That's the God that we serve. That's the name that we call upon. And in this time, actually, Abraham is giving thanks to this everlasting God for a time of peace. Because Abraham had not yet received the fullness of his promise here. He had been given the promise earlier. He had been gone through a lot. He had seen a lot. But he hadn't seen the fullness of his promise realized. But he knew that if God got me this far, he will get me till tomorrow. If God has brought me peace today, he will get me to tomorrow. It was with that same mentality that he moved forward, knowing that he can call upon that name. But how many of you know that it can also be really hard to connect to a God with that kind of power? It's hard to connect to someone whose power is almost unfathomable. I think I said that word right. Unfathomable. If I didn't, I'll cut this out of the tape. I'm just kidding. But unfathomable, it's so beyond our grasp that sometimes it's hard to connect to that kind of God. It's sometimes hard to understand that we can actually take part in that. But see, that's the beauty of this everlasting God, that there is a way to connect. In fact, we actually see this in Hebrews 13:8. We see that Jesus Christ is also everlasting. It reads, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. Now we bring this up because right there we see that Jesus himself is everlasting, but Jesus himself has actually made a way that we can join him in eternity. And we see this in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 21. God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. I read that not that long ago, and you ever have those moments when you're like, okay, I just don't need to speak right now. I don't need to talk. I just need to take in that kind of love for a minute. To understand, he who had no sin took on sin on my behalf. This God of everlasting power also has an everlasting love that would choose to come and intervene, not just intervene in my life, but intervene in such a way that it would too give me a chance to grasp eternity, a chance to be joined in him. I am not perfect. My sister can probably tell you that. My brother-in-law can probably tell you that. I make mistakes. I forget to put gas in the car. All kinds of things go bad. I'm full of pain and hurt and sin. There are things that make me unclean. And I am also, like I said before, I am a creature bound by time. There are moments where I am sitting through a situation and I honestly think this is taking forever and I can't get past this. I have no hope. But then there's this everlasting love that Jesus would come down, lay his life down on my behalf, that I may join him in his righteousness, that I may join him in eternity. That is a gift that I don't deserve, but that is the kind of gift that is involved when you are dealing with his everlasting love. I'm scared of chickens. Let me explain. Birds are scary, okay? I'm just going to say it flat out. Birds are scary. They really are. And if you want proof, I have proof for you. If you've ever seen a chicken run, and if you've ever seen Jurassic Park, and you've seen the raptor run, it's the same thing. It is the exact same thing. I've watched Jurassic World, Jurassic Park. I've watched them a few times because I wanted to be sure. I've seen that raptor run. I've seen chickens run. Same thing, okay? It is terrifying to my core. So, when my parents have chickens, too many chickens. They have it seems like 300 chickens, but it's more like 30 to 40, which is too much for real, okay? Now, when I lived with my parents, sometimes I'd go outside, and you never knew that chickens were so hungry all the time. I thought I was hungry all the time. Chickens are hungry all the time. I would step outside, and you know how chickens can't fly? They can't, but they can soar like little demons coming at you. They could just come like a dart. And so I would step outside, and I would just see this flock come towards me, and I would want to run. Have you ever seen that video of the little boy who's feeding the chickens, and the chickens start chasing him, and he's like, help me? That was me. And I was like 25. It's the truth. It's scary. But I had to learn to stand firm because sometimes when those moments of strength and hope are needed, I needed to stand. And we actually see this. This is about the Bible, I promise you. In 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8 through 9, it says this: be alert and sober-minded when your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in the faith, because you know that the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kind of suffering. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes we find ourselves in trials and tribulations that seem like they are lasting forever, and we have to stand firm in our faith. Stand firm in these moments. Stand firm in knowing that no matter what comes against you, the devil, like a roaring lion, or the dinosaur chicken, whatever is chasing you, we have to stand firm in our faith. But the most beautiful part about this passage actually comes in the next verse. In 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 10 and 11, it says, and the God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, after you have suffered a little while, will himself restore you, make you strong, firm, and steadfast. To him be the power forever and ever. Amen. My trial, my tribulation might be a moment that seems like forever. It might seem like it is everlasting, but I promise you it's not, because I have an everlasting hope that my God, who has called me to eternity, will have my back in the end. That he will give me the strength, that he will restore me, that he will give me the ability to stand firm and steadfast. That same everlasting God who through his everlasting love calls me to his everlasting arms, he is my everlasting hope. I do not understand everything. Sometimes I feel like I am in the valley and I have mountains on every side of me and that I cannot see beyond. I find myself sometimes in a moment that I am in, like the Bible calls it, the valley of the shadow of death. I see no light but mountains on either side. But in those moments, there is something that calls deep within me that says that there is an everlasting God that lies from vanishing point to vanishing point. No matter where you are in this story, no matter where you find yourself in, there is a God who has power over your trials and tribulations, that he will make you strong, firm, steadfast, because you have been called into his eternal glory in Christ. Because his everlasting love has your back. I promise you that your trial and tribulation will one day fall away, fade away. It will. But God will remain. He will always remain. It's funny because I feel almost like I feel like I'm going through this a little fast, but it's because you can take an hour, you can take a day, you can take 100 years, and you would never be able to properly describe the everlasting love and power of God. I can look back at every moment that I've been in and remember that he was there. Not just now, not just tomorrow, but every moment of my life, we've seen it on and on and on. And I ask you, look at the word, find the everlasting God there, but look at your life. Look at your past. Look at your family. Look at the genealogy that lies behind you. Look at those moments and find where God was. Find where the everlasting God intervened. I remember the first time my nephew fell and he hit his head. He cracked his head open in the back. And I remember taking him to the hospital, and I was terrified. I was still like a fresh uncle, so I didn't really know how things were going on. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Bubba hurt his head and he's bleeding. And it was terrifying. And I remember each moment, I promise you, it felt like the clock wasn't even ticking. It just felt like each moment, each second was another eternity, and I was lost in between each one. And I remember that we sat there, and we were on our way to the hospital, and we prayed that God would intervene. And he did. And now look back, to be honest, I don't even remember that story most of the time. Something that felt so great, that mountain that felt so high, was nothing. That fell away, my God persevered. And I remembered it in my own life. I remember the life when I ran away from the Lord, and it felt like that time where I decided that I was going to run away, not listen to God, follow my own path, and just follow my own needs and go one way. I felt like I was lost from God for eternity, and then I realized that was but a moment. Because when I looked back, when I turned back, there was still that everlasting arm of God, that everlasting love of God that was still there reaching for me. That even though my mindset may have changed, his never did. And when I was like, I have to deal with this, and this is going to take so long. It's going to take so long to fix all the mistakes that I've been dealing with my entire life. How can I ever get through it? And I look back now and I realize that that was nothing in comparison to how long God has been with me, how long that everlasting Lord, that everlasting love was there every step of the way. Not just in my life. I look back at my parents' life when their marriage was hurting and they needed someone and they needed God. And I remember being small and young and seeing that and thinking that that was never going to end. And out of the blue, it felt that God was there and his love restored them to a place that I can now see the love that they have for one another. When I was young, I didn't necessarily see that. but my everlasting God did. When I was young, I didn't see that ever ending. When I was young, I thought a marriage was literally every day yelling at the top of your lungs at each other every moment of every day. I thought a father figure was one that you were to be in fear of, that when he got home and you heard the garage door open, that's when you would run to your bed and pretend to be asleep. I remember that childhood felt like it would never end. My dad would never change. My life would never change. And then God intervened. And that moment fell away. My God remained. And now my family is in Israel, praising God and loving each other and loving the Lord. He always remains. In Hebrews chapter 1, verse 10 and 12, it says this. He also says, in the beginning, Lord, you laid the foundation of the earth. The heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. They will all wear out like a garment. You will roll them up like a robe. Like a garment, they will be changed, but you remain the same, and your years will never end. When all else passes away, our everlasting God remains. When all passes away, his power remains. The power that laid the foundation for the earth, the power that created the heavens and the earth, that was in there in the beginning and will be there in the end, that power will remain. His love remains. That everlasting love that chose to reach out for me that I may join him in eternity. The Bible even talks about how Jesus saw equality with God not something to be sought. Rather, he came down, making himself obedient to death. Not just death, but death on the cross. For me, his love remains. And the hope that he brings remains. That no matter the situation, no matter the circumstance, no matter what we face in this life, his hope remains. Because remember, he does not grow tired, he does not grow weary. So I am going to ask you one more time, as we look at Isaiah again, chapter 40, verse 28. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. I may not fully fathom it, but I've heard, and I've seen, and I've experienced, and I know, because I still breathe today, that my family is still safe, that I am still loved. I know that he doesn't grow tired or weary, because every time my situation pulled me down, he pulled me out. He was always there. He will always remain.